Good morning. You're gonna have to forgive me. I'm recovering from like a coldy, flu-y kind of thing. And I was talking to someone yesterday about the energies and vibrations and frequencies and solar flares and all the things. And I feel a lot of our ones who are open vessels are really feeling it the last few days. If anyone else is feeling it, I'd love to hear. Please comment, what's been going on for you spiritually, physically, mentally. So just bear with me. And bed hair, don't care. So I thought I would quickly share, because a lovely lady in a really great group shared about a speeding fine that she received that originally was in her husband's name. And then you know how on the back you can nominate a different driver, and it didn't seem 100% who was the nominated driver, but he obviously put her down, right? Because now it's come back around to her. And I think it was for driving 78 kilometers in a 70 zone. So it just made me think about the processes, and like in our community, there's really great mentorship there, and this type of topic gets in our email inbox every single day. So I've written some notes. I was actually watching John Farnham gig on YouTube just before, and I was thinking of some notes, and I also took notes from a really great workshop that Zev at Warrior Law runs online. Anyone can watch that workshop. I think it's workshop 6. Don't quote me on that, I don't know everything, but go have a look in the member hub for Warrior at Law, and he shares a lot about this at different workshops that he does around the country. So just bear with me, and I'm going to open up these notes in my notes section of the phone, and we'll go from there. So yes, so the summary of the issue was that the vehicle was detected speeding 78 kilometers in a 70k zone, and the fine was issued to the registered owner. The husband, who is the registered owner of the vehicle, from my comprehension, please, if this is you, please correct me, okay? And he returned the notice stating he wasn't the driver, and he may have nominated his wife as the driver. I say may because I still can't really tell in the post, but anyway. Now, the fine has been reissued in her name, despite there being no photographic proof identifying her. Now, there's obviously policies and procedures with regards to that step that he did by nominating someone else as the driver. And the vehicle is not registered in her name. Now, she obviously put this in a group because she's asking, well, what are ways to lawfully remedy this? How should she challenge it? How should she respond? Now, obviously, I think first step would be to request the evidentiary photo and calibration certificate, right? So even if this letter doesn't include it, this woman can formally request a copy of the photo evidence that identifies her as the driver. Because look, most Harkin is eating my scarf, by the way. It's very distracting, mate. So a lot of us have received infringements with that mobile camera picture, and it really just picks up the number plate of the car. Rarely the driver is visible, so mostly they only capture the plates, not the driver. And the camera calibration certificate, I've heard Zev on one-on-one sessions talk about this a lot, proving the device was tested and accurate on the date of the alleged offense. So please, it's early. I'm not giving any advice to anyone. I'm just sharing thoughts friend to friend out loud. One could request this evidence. You could write a template saying, I request a copy of all evidence relied upon in this matter, including but not limited to A, photographic evidence showing the driver of the vehicle, B, camera calibration certificate valid at the time of the alleged offence, and C, any statutory declaration made nominating me as the driver. Thing is, I feel like with C, I was looking into this and maybe they could provide a copy of him ticking that box, right? Anyway, so one may consider demanding proof of proper nomination. So like I just said, you're entitled to get a copy of the nomination form or the stat dec completed by the husband, right? So initially on the back of that form, he nominated the wife as the driver, and confirmation of the legal basis on which she is being pursued as the alleged driver, given the car is not registered in her name. For example, like if the original form wasn't signed correctly, if it was incomplete, or if there was no legitimate evidence linking her as the driver, then the fine may lack lawful basis. Now, the next step after that, you could submit a stat dec if you weren't driving, right? This all comes down to virtues, values, what you feel aligned with what you feel is right. If you were not the driver, you can complete a statutory declaration stating that, and it must be, obviously, it needs to be witnessed by a JP or an authorised person, and you need to send it before the due date of this fine that's been sent to you, because this may cause the fine to be withdrawn, or then we're going to have like a swings and roundabouts. Then it will get sent back to the original designated driver, the husband. Okay, now from here, this is where we can choose where we pick our battles. We can choose if we want to use this as a learning tool. We could consider electing to go to court. So we could consider electing to go to court after doing all those steps if there was no photo of the woman driving and the vehicle's not registered in her name and she disputes being the driver. She can then elect to have the matter heard in court. There's a box on the back of this fine that you've received, and in court the burden of proof is on the prosecution to show, 1, she was the driver, and 2, the device was accurate and lawfully operated. Again, back to that calibration certificate that Zev talks about often. Because if they can't prove both, especially her identity as driver, the charges can be dismissed. And this whole thing really raises procedural and jurisdiction questions. If pursuing a lawful based route, you could also, now this depends, whether you're wearing a white belt or a brown belt or a black belt at this point, but you could question the jurisdiction of the authority, which is the executive director of the Department of Transport, to issue penalties without a wet ink contract. Now, these are just my humble thoughts. I'm just sharing everything. I just believe that the statutory public system will just steamroll over that. They're all about policies, procedures, administrative mandates, right? But that's just my 2 cents worth about that. You could ask if you've entered into an agreement binding her to the Road Traffic Administration Act of 2008. And you could clarify whether the person named is a legal fiction distinct from her living self. Again, we get many who contact us weekly around these ideas, and you really have to be on your A game to go down that path. Yeah, I really believe that that line of argument really requires confidence, and in court and also via correspondence. And they're not always accepted in statutory jurisdictions. But it depends also how you feel aligned to go down that deeper path of sovereignty. Again, I always talk about the distinction between sovereign and sovereign. I have a education about that. If you can find it in my list of YouTube videos. Again, I'm really sorry about my voice today. So this is a hypothetical action plan, which I'll go through while preventing Harkin destroying my beautiful scarf any longer. Okay, so if the lovely lady who initially asked this question is watching, I recommend you could request photographic evidence and see the original nomination form ASAP. It has to be done before that due date. Submit a stat dec if you weren't driving, which you weren't driving, right? Elect to go to court if you want to challenge the fine formally, and prepare the court defense. Demand proof that she was the driver, device accuracy, and also lawful basis. So something I was thinking about, if this woman claims 100% she was not the driver, does it go back then to her husband? Like swings and roundabouts, right? And then can he then claim he can't remember who was driving? Did he let someone borrow the car, but doesn't know, right? What are we going to do then when it goes back to him? So if the wife 100% denies being the driver and provides a formal statutory declaration, this is what will typically happen. And so another step-by-step list. Hold on. Now my phone is glitching. Okay, so this will be probably the procedural flow from that. So the wife will submit a stat dec saying denying being the driver, and you'll have to state under oath, I was not the driver of the vehicle at the time of the alleged offence on the 23rd of February at 5:01 p.m. I do not know who was driving. Then the infringement notice is going to get sent back to the husband, right? And then this is because the nominated person has denied it, and the responsibility reverts to the registered owner unless someone else can be positively identified. So then this is where the husband has a couple of options here, right? One, claim he doesn't recall who was driving, and he submits his own stat dec stating, one, that he wasn't the driver, and two, he lent the vehicle out but can't recall who specifically used it that day, and he has no record or written agreement of who borrowed the car. Or option B would be accept the fine himself and end the matter, only if he doesn't want to contest it further. Okay, now in these matters, what happens if the driver can't be identified? And again, this is not my area. None of this is my intellectual property or original thoughts. I'm just very attentive when I hear Zev conduct one-on-one consults with amazing living men and women, and I treat it like a learning tool, and I'm a sponge, so I just want to add that in here. I don't want to take any credit from what I'm saying. So if the owner says he can't identify the driver and provides a sworn declaration, then legally the burden of proof rests on the state. The agency may issue a failure to nominate fine, which can be several hundreds of dollars. In court, he can defend it by showing he exercised reasonable diligence but still couldn't identify the driver. Look, this isn't a criminal charge, and the standard is balance of probabilities, not beyond reasonable doubt. Okay, so how to avoid the failure to nominate penalty? So basically, this is where the husband, this is hypothetical, I'm just speaking out loud ideas, the husband would explain that the car was loaned casually, as that's common in family social settings. No written record was kept. It was not him or his wife, and he made efforts to identify the driver, checking phone records, diary, conversations, and was unable to. A letter and a stat dec with this detail may be enough to get the original fine withdrawn, or it could move the matter to court, where burden shifts to state to prove driver identity. Now, If one stands firm with this and no photo or proof of driver identity exists, the state cannot presume who was driving just because someone was nominated, right? So, hypothetical statutory remedy, right, in their system, using their procedures, the wife files a stat dec denying being the driver. The husband received notice again. He files a stat dec stating it wasn't him either, and he cannot recall who borrowed the car. If fined for failure to nominate, defendant showing genuine attempts to identify the driver. Now, with all of that, this entire matter sits squarely within the public statutory jurisdiction governed by administrative procedures and policy enforcement, not truth, equity, or natural law, if we're going down this path. And there are some real legends who are really going down the path of equity law, and they're, you know, going great guns at that. So it's important to note, and I talk about this with regards to statutory administrative policies and procedures, it's really important that one doesn't get steamrolled by the system simply because you don't navigate the process properly. Okay, so I've said this before, I believe, you know, my thumbprint is different to your thumbprint. None of this is cookie cutter stuff, templated stuff. And again, weekly, we have, I'd say 80% of living men and women that come to us, it's because the horse is already bolted, they've followed a template, they want to cut some corners, and then they come to us because life isn't a cookie cutter templated approach, all right? Each case is different, and we need to be looking at it based on its own facts. And beyond that, one must weigh up the cost of the fight, right? All of us here, I really give kudos to all of us because we're up for that fight, right? However, is the original fine worth more or less than the time, energy, and sometimes money required to dispute it? Do you have the comprehension, the stamina, and clarity to take it all the way if it does end up in court? That said, and again, Zev says this a lot, there's a huge value in treating situations like this as your own real life education workshop. You get to experience how the system responds, how paperwork is treated, and how the burden of proof is handled, and you build confidence by the doing. I always say learning is in the doing. That is how we learn on a practical level. So if that lovely lady is watching, and I recommend her husband watches as well, if you do choose to take it further, I do recommend getting one-on-one lawful guidance from another living man or woman who is well versed in not just the statutory side, but also the deeper remedy work about you as a living man or woman. But that's completely at your discretion, and we're all on our own journeys. And I said before, this isn't my area, but I can just speak for myself. I've never been in your situation, but if it was me, I would seek out that outside input before committing to any specific route. But whatever you choose, you know, back yourself, be strategic, be aware of your jurisdiction, and just, I think we all just need to pick our battles consciously. See ya.